Our scripture lesson today is from the Gospel according to Mark, the 9th chapter, verses 14 to 29. Listen for the word of the Lord. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet Jesus. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so." He answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "This kind can come out only through prayer." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Jerzy Grotowski was a theater practitioner from Poland in the middle 20th century who sought to bring theater back to its more basic elements at a time when production values were rising and technology was creating all new kinds of opportunity in the theatrical arts. In 1964, he was interviewed about his interpretation of the theater arts, and in that interview, he describes how various groups understand the theater. To the academic, the theater is a performed text, he said. The average audience member, the theater is an opportunity for entertainment. For those of a higher society who attend high society plays, they seek after an emotional experience that will leave them with a sense of self-satisfaction. Those within the theater have their own views of it too. The actor sees the theater primarily about himself. The designers see their creations as bringing the text to life, very similar to how the academic understands the theater. And the producer, Grotowski criticizes, sees theater as an opportunity for his own notoriety. Grotowski notes that most producers are in that role because they failed as either a playwright, an actor, or a director. He goes on to ponder then, what is essential to theater? It's not costumes and lighting. It's not sets and music, special effects. In fact, it doesn't even involve a script or a text. But the two things that you cannot have theater without are an actor and an audience. Which leads Grotowski to define theater as what takes place between the spectator and the actor. It's a simple but profound definition. The interaction of the audience and the performer is what makes theater theater. It's the no man's land between two hearts, two bodies, two souls. Something is created within that space that could be created in no other way. Think about that space between people as we consider our scripture passage today. Jesus heals a boy who's afflicted with what today we might call epilepsy. But the curiosity of the passage is why Jesus is able to cast out this demon and his disciples cannot. At this time in the story, Jesus has sent his disciples out to perform signs and wonders in his name. So it's not unreasonable to believe that the disciples would have been able to perform this miracle. I believe what makes Jesus capable of this act while his disciples cannot is that Jesus has a particular attention to what happens between two parties as they encounter one another. If Jerzy Grotowski defines theater as what takes place between the spectator and the actor, perhaps full humanity is attending to the space of what happens between one person and another. When we first meet the father in this story, his case is presented to Jesus. It sounds like an indictment. My son suffers from a malady that might take his life from him. I brought him to your disciples who I was told could heal him. They were no use. They were inept. What kind of leader are you? The accusation has this language of exchange, this language of transaction. Sounds something like, well, I took my car in to the mechanic because I had a grinding in the transmission, and they just sent me home and told me there was nothing they could do about it. You can just picture before Jesus came on the scene, his disciples, one by one, approaching the boy, shouting their incantations, making demands, commanding things of that evil spirit, their brows furrowed, sweat forming at the temples, their teeth clenched, and then one after another walking away embarrassed, inept, a failure. But pay attention to how Jesus responds to this accusation. He asks to see the boy. There will be no healing from a distance in this instance. When the boy is brought before him, the demon throws him into a fit, his body writhing in ways he does not have control over, foaming at the mouth. Jesus sits in that suffering with the Father and the Son. Then he asks the question of the Father, how long has this been happening to him? As a way of inviting himself into the story and the history of this man and his family. And from that question, we learn of the terror that rules over this man's life every day, how he fears his son will die because of this malady that he carries. Only then does Jesus offer a word of reassurance. Anything is possible for the one who believes. And the Father does not respond with the right answer, the thing he thinks he should say in order to elicit healing from Jesus. Instead, all of his anger, his sorrow, his pain, his longing, it bursts forth, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Here is a revelation. A man who wants to believe, but struggles to do so, and yet he's willing to name that struggle before Jesus. Now, Jesus heals the boy at great cost to the boy. The crowd around him presumes him to be dead. But Jesus reaches down, lifts the boy up in his arms, and helps him again to stand. then we have the contrast. Why the disciples can't cast out the demon while Jesus can. Jesus says prayer. But perhaps prayer here is not just being able to recite the right incantation or the correct recipe. Perhaps what he means here is more complex. The disciples do not understand their own humanity or the boy's humanity. Jesus embodies real humanity, and in that expression, united with God, healing comes. That real humanity united with God, that is the life of prayer. The disciples seek the healing in this instance, it looks like, to prove their own discipleship. The evidence of this comes in the fact that we don't hear them offer any words of exclamation or joy when the boy is restored to life. There's no excitement about the life that this father and son will now have because of what Jesus has done. The only concern of the disciples is themselves and their own abilities or lack thereof. But with Jesus, we see a being in encounter. He shows us that to be fully human is not based in my personal identity. I am only a personal identity in relationship with other persons. I am only human in relationship. The disciples are trapped in their own egos and in their own performance goals. Jesus is freed of that obsession. And so he can be fully present to this father and this son, to see the boy, to watch the pain, to hear the story, to ask the question, to honor the cry of faith and doubt, to reach down and lift up and restore. In this season of Lent, we are looking at Jesus as the one who was fully human. We've discovered that full humanity comes as we are participants in God's history of deliverance. As that history of deliverance unfolds, we discover that God has humiliated our glory and freed us from shame. And therefore, we have a life that is free to seek the well-being of others. As agents of deliverance, we can offer care and concern. We can see others without being concerned about our own acclaim, our own reward, our own respect. Jesus shows us here that to be human is to attend to the interaction between one person and another, to borrow Jerzy Grotowski's language. Our humanity is in that space of encounter. Now, we might want to say that Jesus, in living in attention to this space, was selfless. We often say that about people who show particular attention to others. But theologian Karl Barth posits that selfless is hardly the word to describe this humanity. Jesus is not selfless. For in this being with and for others, he is supremely himself. The theme of the New Testament witness is a kind of incomparable picture of human life and character. What emerges is a supreme I, wholly determined by and to the thou. We are only ourselves in encounter with other selves as we are shaped by them and as we share ourselves with them. For the Christian, this is humanity. There is no I without the thou. In fact, to try to create a personal identity that is cut off from other relationships, that is actually the life that is selfless without a sense of self. And the paradox is that when I am in an encounter with you, bound by the thing that comes between us, in that bondedness, I am actually